Hello, welcome to Wednesday's lecture. We're going to finish up, as I said in the announcement, we're going to finish up that last section of our chapter, Renaissance and Reformation, which is the scientific revolution. And I feel it's really important because this scientific revolution kind of wraps everything up and kind of ties everything together with what we're doing. So let's think first about, again, this continuum that we're talking about in this chapter. And the most important thing is that people are beginning to think and question. And one of the things that they're questioning in through all of this is the place and the role of the church in their lives. We did that with the Renaissance, this idea of Machiavelli and a prince or a king shouldn't rule with Christian ethics and principles, that the ends justify the means. Then we move on to the Reformation that really, again, reforms and creates this new Christian faith. And then we're going to end with the scientific revolution. And so you have the notes attached to this assignment so that you can look through them. I won't be following them because I can't figure out how to do that at the same time. I do have notes again on the side, so I don't know how to do that like a newscaster person. So you'll see me looking down at them to make sure that I've covered everything. So the scientific revolution in this time period is really important because what the scientific revolution is really aiming to prove is that there is a God. This is a time period when science and religion walk hand in hand. And all of our scientists are going to say, with a couple of differences, they're going to say, this world is so enormous and created so miraculously with such perfect order that there's no way that this could have occurred unless it was created by a heavenly being. And so that's what science will be proving, which will be very different, obviously, in the 20th century with the way science approaches religion in that aspect. So we're going to begin this story with a guy named Copernicus. Copernicus is a Polish monk, and he is in Poland, which is a big faraway distance from Rome, the head of the church and the seat of the church. And like we studied in our last chapter with monks, monks are required to do things. They are required to keep busy. And so one of the things that Copernicus starts to do is he starts to keep data. And he records, like a scientist, certain stars in the sky every night and where they're moving. And as a result of years of this, he comes up with this novel idea that the earth is not still. The earth is moving. And prior to that, the church teachings was obviously that God created the earth, and so the earth is the center of the universe, and the earth stands still, and everything moves around the earth. That's called geocentric. So the earth is, the earth is centered, and everything is moving around it. Sun, everything else. The earth stands still because it's the most important thing. Copernicus is saying with his data, I don't think that's right. And so he writes a book called On Heavenly Spheres, and to save himself from the wrath of the Pope and perhaps death, he dedicates the book to the Pope. And he dedicates it in a way that says, I understand, Pope, that you are a lover of science as well. And so here's what I think. So Copernicus writes this book. Again, he's far away. Not many people pay attention to it. But the next person that's really going to pay attention to it is a scientist who doesn't believe Copernicus. He says, I don't think this is real. This is a scientist called Tycho Brahe. And he says, I think you're completely wrong. I'm going to use your own data, Copernicus, to prove you wrong. And so Tycho Brahe does that as well. He looks at all this data and he says, yikes, I gotta say, I think Copernicus is correct. Like, the earth is moving. And that again gives validation to science and data and facts. Our third guy that looks at this data, Johannes Kepler, he looks at it and he sees not only that Copernicus and Brahe are correct, that the earth is moving and it continuously moves, that it also has a couple of other properties. One, that the orbits are not circular, they're elliptical. So that's this circle that's squashed. And he also determines that a season, a day, a year is determined by the trips around the sun. And so from Kepler, we get a lot of our information about the solar system and the way that it works. What I am so often stunned by is how accurate these three gentlemen are with just rudimentary scientific instruments. I mean, they don't have anything really, just their eyes and science. And what Kepler is going to say in the beginning is a lot of this is mathematically driven, that you can't do this without the understanding that math is a fact-based and everything can be proven like that mathematically, which, again, I'm not that fond of the whole math thing. So we've got all these people looking up at the sky and observing the sky and challenging the biblical authority that the earth is still. So that's the beginnings. Those three guys kind of go off and do their own thing until we hit a guy named Galileo. And hopefully most of you have heard of Galileo. Galileo is, unfortunately, located in Italy. He's in Rome. Our other three guys are far away. They write stuff. It gets kind of back to the Pope, but not in the backyard. Galileo's problem is location. He is right in the Pope's backyard. And Galileo's going to build a telescope. So a telescope is a series of concave and convex lenses, and that the concave and the convex of lenses allows him to see distances. And he builds this telescope that allows him to see Jupiter. And he watches the moons go around Jupiter, and he begins to say, yep, all three of these guys are right. They're exactly right. We are moving, and we are moving around this thing that called the sun, which now we know is a star, but it's a sun. Galileo's problem, again, is that he is right there in Rome. And this is, again, at the height of not only the Protestant Reformation, there are religious wars going on, there's a counter-reformation that's happening. And so he's like right in the middle of all this. And so what happens to Galileo is that he is brought up, much like Martin Luther, for an inquisition. And much like Martin Luther, it's a trial. And Galileo goes on trial. Unlike Martin Luther, who goes on trial in Germany and he's able to be safe and whisk away, Galileo's not going to have that option. He is in Rome. He is right there where the church is located. And so Galileo takes a different tactic with his inquisition. He is asked to recant, and Galileo says, okay, I'll recant. I'll take it back. The earth is still, and everything moves around it. But then under his breath, he's like, well, it's still moving. Galileo understood that science, no matter how you say it, if I say it or don't say it, it's still moving. It's very much, I think, like when you are asked to apologize for something. If someone says, if you just apologize, I'll forget it all. Okay, then I'm sorry. But inside, you're not really sorry. That's kind of like what Galileo said. You can tell me to say, Pope, that it's not moving, but it still moves. So he did recant, and his recantation is different than Martin Luther's refusal, because that was based on a religious belief. Galileo said, I can deny science all you want me to, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening. Galileo was still forced into house arrest for the rest of his life. He lived under house arrest and continued to do experiments and all of those things. So that takes us up to Galileo. We've got a couple other people that we need to talk about. Sir Francis Bacon and René Descartes. René Descartes, who is a dude. Don't get confused by the René. He's a guy. They will be the co-fathers of what we know of as the scientific method. This idea that you use in science, you come up with a hypothesis, a theory, you conduct experiments, and then your experiment is either valid or invalid. And that's a combination of these two guys. Sir Francis Bacon was an experiment guy. He said that you should be able to come up with something, run experiments to prove or disprove. And from Sir Francis Bacon, we get that idea. So scientists in the real world of science, when they come up with something new, or a new experiment or something new, one of the important parts of the validation of that is that other scientists must do that same experiment and get the same results. And that's the only way that becomes a valid experiment. And that's what Sir Francis Bacon said, that experimentation should be logical, it should be experimental, and we should be able to repeat those experiments and get the same results. Descartes says different. He is deductive. So he says we are smart individuals. God gave us the ability to use logic and reason. I should be able to deduce things, deductive reasoning, to understand the world. A mama cow and a daddy cow, I guess a bull, going to have a baby, it's going to be a baby cow. It's not going to be a chicken or a duck. I don't have to run an experiment on that. And these two men together will give us the scientific method. The most important thing about Descartes is that one of his most important quotes that is used quite often, I think, therefore I am. And he runs opposite of Bacon, because Descartes says, I don't need to run an experiment that I'm here. And if I think it, then it's a deductive reasoning, and I can, as an intelligent person, reason and deduce that out. So from those, we get that scientific method, and again, a process to begin scientific discovery. From that, we just get an onslaught of different scientists that you can look at in the notes. We get Harvey, who's looking at the heart as a pump. We get people looking at artificial limbs. We will end this discussion with the greatest scientist of all times is Sir Isaac Newton. And Sir Isaac Newton, again, is going to give us some really basic rules of the earth and how the world operates. Again, two things come from that. One, that this world could not have just haphazardly shown up because everything is so logical, mathematically proven, and in order. It had to be created by a higher deity. And then also that everything in the world can be understood by mathematics. Again, not really liking that thing. But at the end, what's very important is that all of these scientists are monks, are deductive, inductive reasoning, Harvey with his heart pump, Newton, they are all very devoutly religious people, and especially Galileo. So this scientific revolution is not about disproving anything, and if anything, it works to prove the idea of the world created by a higher being, a deity. So that is the end of that chapter. And what we're going to work on, we're going to have two assignments attached to this end of this chapter. The one you're going to work on today is a graphic novel. And if you remember, we did one of these way back at the beginning of the year where we did, I think, flying by or digging by the seat of our pants or something with archaeology. This one's going to be about Galileo. And Galileo, the graphic novel, covers a time period in which Galileo is being brought before the Inquisition. He hasn't been there yet. And the graphic novel is between Galileo and the guard, who first arrests him and then takes him. And Galileo's explaining things, and the guard, being of a socioeconomic class, not highly educated, devoutly religious, because this is in Italy, so he would be a Catholic. And there will be a point in the graphic novel where, after listening to Galileo, the guard begins to have questions. And so that's what you're going to do. You're going to read the graphic novel, and then there is a writing prompt that's a separate link. Open that up, and it will explain to you what you need to write about. Again, the most important thing is understanding that you are a guard. You don't have the benefit of a lot of education, and that you are devoutly Catholic. And one of the things that happens in the graphic novel is Galileo asks the guard a question, and you will be replying to that question. As always with our writing assignments, make sure that you are thoroughly answering all parts of that question and making sure that you're writing in complete thoughts and complete sentences. And that will be your assignment for today. So please let me know. I've left the reply box open on this lecture. So please let me know if you are. If you have any questions or you need any help with anything, and I will be glad to help you out. And